Most people interpret events the way Joe Rogan does, which is, I'm just someone who's curious, I want to know the truth, I feel like I'm being lied to, sometimes I believe this side, sometimes I believe that side, and I'm not going to pledge my loyalty to anyone and be in captivity to anybody. And so, what James was saying about what he tries to do, which is not persuade or convince or recruit, but just sort of to expose and let other people reach their own conclusions, I think that's the thing that builds the most amount of trust, and that's what you're seeing more than anything else in this independent sphere.
I think the broader issue is that the media tends to look at everything through a political lens now. And they tend to project, you wrote about this, Glenn, they tend to project that onto me. So they accuse me of that which they are guilty of. And everything is political. And what's most remarkable, another thing Glenn wrote about in this Substack, he wrote about this very issue, is that it's become almost like they, after the FBI raided me, there was this whole debate about who is a journalist. And the people that are doing the actual journalism, they go after those people the most. They'll target actual independent journalists. It's almost like there's a cartel, and they're trying to protect who is supposed to be a journalist. But journalism is an activity as much as it is a protected, priesthood class of individuals. But I think the greatest irony, Glenn, in what you're writing is what Glenn said is that they target Glenn. They called you an anti-surveillance activist.
Yeah.
And they call me a far-right attack activist. What does that even mean? And isn't all good investigative reporting activism insofar as you're adversarial? These are a lot of absurdities and ironies.
I think it's a key point that there's this incredible misconception that's being promulgated on purpose by employees of media corporations who might have the job title in their HR file of journalists, but what they really are is employees of media corporations. They want to create this fiction that somehow there's a part of the Constitution that isn't for every American citizen, even though it says it is. This part of the Constitution is like this secret little part that applies only to people who earn the title journalist. And if you go back and look at how journalism was practiced and the freedom of the press, it was, the actual literal press, the printing press, which is what they were protecting. Most of the people who were using that to agitate against the crown were not journalists. That was not a profession. It was like they're like, here's a surgeon, here's a lawyer, here's a journalist. That didn't exist. Journalism, as James suggested, was something that citizens could use as a tool, just like freedom of speech, to agitate against those in power. It is an activity that's protected, available to everybody, and the idea that there's now this like cloistered licensed status that you need to prove that you belong to. And the other irony of it is, in some way, the irony is that the more stories you break of significance, somehow in their eyes, the less of a journalist you are.
That's great.
Which is why if you ask most of these employees of media corporations, do they think Julian Assange should be in prison? They'll say, yeah, of course, he's not a journalist, even though they could live to be 5,000 years old and never get close to the number of significant stories he's broken. And the same is true with James, and there's an attempt to read me out of journalism as well, despite the stories I've done. So, it's kind of this inversion, it's the ultimate propaganda.